Now, when most people actually talk about an overhand shuffle control, most people will actually think of the Mahatma control, which I'll eventually get to. But there's actually a myriad of other controls which are done with an overhand shuffle. One of them is this one. So, an easy substitute for the pass. So, contrary to what you may believe, this is not a substitute for the classic pass or the Herman pass, or even other types of passes. This is actually developed to be a substitute for the Charlier pass, which we've spoken about on this channel before. But unlike the Mahatma control, this actually doesn't control the selection to the top of the deck. Rather, it controls it to the bottom of the deck. Okay? So without further ado, let's go right into the history section of this move. So like I've said in the intro, this move was actually done as a substitute or simplification of the Charlier pass or cut. So quote from the book where it comes from, quote, "This is a simplification of the Charlier one-handed pass," unquote. So obviously I already made a video on the Charlier pass or cut. You can watch the full video over here, over there, I think that's how YouTube works. But you can watch the full video and tutorial and history section over there. But the crux of the Charlier pass is this: it was made famous by a very famous magician called Charlier, and was first published in a book called Sleight of Hand back in 1877 by Edwin Sachs, and was under the name of single-handed pass. So that's basically the general history, or the first written entry of the Charlier pass. But returning back to this control, where this control actually comes from was actually from Card Manipulations issue 1 back in 1933 by G. Newgard. So that's where this move comes from, and it was under the name of an easy substitute for the pass. But the problem with G. Newgard is that, and you'll notice that with a lot of his works, especially with things like Expert Card Technique and Royal Road to Card Magic, there we go, you'll realize that a lot of those don't really have proper crediting. Like just a couple of those entries, just a couple of entries in those books really have crediting. So it's really hard to tell where this move actually comes from. So all that we really know about this move was that it's actually a simplification of Charlier's Charlier pass, and that was first published in G. Newgard's pamphlets without credits. So that's pretty much all that we really know of the history behind this move. So it's a relatively short history section, but that's because that's all we basically know of this move. So, in terms of prerequisites for this move, you really don't need to learn the Charlier pass to learn this move, even though it's a simplification of the Charlier pass. But one thing that you should probably learn before you get into this move is how to collapse a break into a step. The book doesn't really tell you that you need to know this, but it just makes getting into this move from any position a lot easier. So you can go ahead and learn that in the info card above. So let's get into how you actually get into this move as described in the book. You have a card selected, and as is returned to the deck, you're going to use your left thumb to lift up about half of the deck, propping the right side, the right long edge, against your middle finger, ring finger, and pinky finger, just like so. So it's basically, again, just like you're opening up a Charlier cut, okay? So you're just going to open this up like so. And now you're just gonna slip this card, the selection, on the top of the bottom packet like so, and you're just gonna push it in like so, okay? So once this selection is on top of the bottom packet, as you're actually going to go close the top packet back on top of this bottom packet, you're actually gonna slightly shift your thumb, middle finger, ring finger, and pinky finger slightly to the right. So it's just a very slight nudge, right? It's just a very slight relaxation, very slight opening of these fingers, right? And what this does is that when you close the deck, now you have a step over here, right? Because if you don't do this slight nudge, right? If I don't do this slight nudge, when I go to close this packet, it's just going to land square. So I want this slight little nudge off to the right to happen. So then I have this step over here, okay? So now the bottom packet over here is essentially going to be clipped in between of the base of your index and of the thumb, okay? So what happens is when you're releasing this packet, when you drop down this packet, it closes on top, and then your thumb just relaxes and lays on top of this bottom packet over here, okay? So now you have this bottom packet clipped in between of the base of your index and your thumb, okay? Just like so. So underneath of your thumb is this, okay? And your selection is over here. So that's basically the position that you need to get to for this control to work. Now, like I said in the prerequisites section, you can get into this position if you just collapse a pinky break into a step. So I'll just briefly brush over how you actually do it. So if you have a pinky break, right? So if you have a pinky break above of the selection, like so, right? Then you can just, from pure friction, if you just start to move your pinky towards the right, it will also drag the top packet, right, towards the right. And this actually exposes this bottom packet over here. So now your selection is in full view. And now if you just lay your left thumb on top of this step, you're basically in the same position, okay? So again, it's just going to be a pinky break. Slip your pinky a bit deeper into the pinky break. The tip of the pinky contacts the face of this bottom card over here, and then you just relax this pinky finger, and this causes this packet to just drift towards the right, like so, okay? If you want full details, again, it's in the info card above, but that's how you actually get this into this position from a pinky break, okay? So what this means is that now you're not restricted to just this particular mechanic, right? Now what this means is that you can get into this move from a dribble, right? You can get into this move from a dribble, right? You can also get into this move from a spread, right? And then you can also get into it from any other way that you want. As long as you have a pinky break, you can get into this move, all right? You're not only restricted to this particular context, okay? So that's how you get into this move from just a general pinky break, okay? So now that you have this, now that you have this step formed and you're clipping this bottom packet in between of your thumb and the base of your index finger, what you're going to do now is that you're actually just going to move this deck into an overhand shuffle position, okay? So you're just gonna curl in your middle ring and pinky finger underneath the deck, and then your right hand is just gonna grab the entire deck from the short edges, like so, okay? So it's just gonna curl in, grab everything, like so. And now you'll realize that the side of your thumb is actually contacting directly on top of the selection, like so. So now, to control this card, it's very simple. Just from pure friction, if you just move your thumb, right? If you just move your thumb, this card will come along, and then you can also clip this card in between of the base of your index finger and your thumb, okay? So this is hidden under the motion of an overhand shuffle, right? So you're just going to move your thumb underneath here, and this is just going to drag this one card over here, right? One card, and then now you basically have the card already in your left hand, right? You're basically done the control over here because it's the first card that you peeled off. And now it's just very simple. You're just going to do a normal overhand shuffle, like so. And that controls the card to the bottom of the deck. All right, so we do this from an actual selection. So 4 of hearts, slip it on the top of the bottom packet, like so. Nudge it to the right, collapse this top packet. So then this forms a break. Your thumb is contacting the face of this card, right? Curl in these fingers, overhand shuffle position, right? Friction, drag this card, clip it, relax, and then overhand shuffle. And that brings the selection to the bottom of the deck, like so, okay? So it's a very, very simple move. But much like every other sleight that concerns shuffles, having a consistent pacing and rhythm throughout the move is the key to making it look good, right? Because what you don't want it to look like is this, right? Right? You don't want this peeling action to be like separate from the rest of the shuffle. You don't want it to be peel and then shuffle. You want it to basically be one consistent, right, motion of peel and then shuffle, right? So no hesitation whatsoever, just shuffle, okay? And that will make the control look a lot better, okay? Now, you might notice there is a slight discrepancy with this move. Well, actually two discrepancies. One is that you're only pulling one card for the first overhand shuffle chop, right? So if you don't know what chop means, this is a chop, right? Every time you peel cards, that's basically a chop in an overhand shuffle. Here, you'll notice that you're actually just peeling one card, right? That's one thing that that revolves around the control, right? You're only peeling one card for the first chop. The second thing is that there should be a thumb drag over the top of the deck whenever you do an overhand shuffle chop, which is absent for the first chop, which is the control, right? So you actually take a look at an overhand shuffle. Your left thumb reaches over and grabs a packet, right? That's how the shuffle works. But because you're doing the control, there's a lack of that, right? You're just straight up doing this, right? So then it doesn't look as nice because then this moment sticks out. This moment sticks out because now it's suddenly different. You have to, because now when you do this chop, it seems very out of place and nothing else moves. It seems like you're just extracting this card from the center and then you're reaching over, right? So again, with Erdnase and all that stuff, consistency in motion, right? You want everything to sort of look the same, but because this thing, right, this control, right, it lacks the thumb chop, so this already gives off red flags as to what you're actually doing, okay? So that is two discrepancies with this particular move. Now, unfortunately for the second discrepancy, we can't really cover that up, mainly because that's how the control works, mainly because that's how you actually grab the card. You have to slip this card from the center of the deck to execute the control. So there's really no way around that, but for the first one, there's actually a way around it. So if I have my step formed, and I have this card over here, and my selection over here, so as I go to clip this card over here, what I'm going to do is I'm just actually going to slightly loosen my grip on the top of these cards. So my right hand just slightly loosens its grip, and what this causes it to do is that these cards just fall down, right? This packet actually just falls down. So now when I go to shuffle this card, right, now I have a bunch of cards on top of my selection, and this selection remains on the bottom, right? So now the discrepancy of just grabbing one card is a lot less because I have a whole bunch of cards to follow along. And in the event where someone actually notices that you're only grabbing one card, well, now you have a barrier, right? And of course, that's the exact same thing, okay? So this is just a very slight finesse where you just loosen your grip on the deck, allowing some cards to fall along of this one card, okay? And that provides cover for this one card, okay? So I do it with a selection here, 3 of clubs, over here, slip it here, nudge to the right, close, overhand shuffle position. As you begin to clip this card, loosen your grip. Some cards fall on top, right? That's the first chop, and then shuffle the rest on top, and then that's now on the bottom, okay? So that's just a very slight finesse. So this will basically do two things. It'll provide cover for your first single card peel, right? Obviously, because there's a whole bunch of cards now following along this card. And also, it'll make it seem more like a legitimate overhand shuffle since there's more cards that comes along, right? For the control, right? So it's just a very, very small change, but I do think that it adds a lot. Again, like I said, this won't solve the thumb drag discrepancy, right? Because this revolves around of this clipping mechanic, this sort of slip cut mechanic. But it's the closest thing that I think that will get to finessing this move without completely changing the mechanics, okay? So it's just dropping down the top cards and we just control it, okay? So that's just a very slight finesse regarding this move. So if you're interested in many other overhand shuffle controls, there are a couple of sources that you can look at. One is Farelli's Card Magic by Victor Farelli. There's an ebook that's being sold on library for Victor Farelli's work. There's also Card Manipulations by Gene Ugard. There's, I believe there's a couple of overhand shuffle controls in Card Manipulations. There's also Close-Up Card Magic by Harry Lorraine. And then there's Card College Volume 1 by Roberto Giobbi. So those are just a couple of sources that you can look at regarding overhand shuffle controls. So I think there are definitely better controls out there, especially when it comes to sort of just bottom controls and overhand shuffle controls. But again, like I say in my videos, I do think that's interesting to take a look at some slides, even though I'm not the biggest fan, or even if you're not the biggest fan of certain moves, or even though they're flawed. Mainly because I think it's sort of important to sort of learn from these moves, because, well, there's always something to learn from moves. Because more importantly, this actually shows that progression isn't necessarily a linear line. Because remember, this move started out as a simplification for the Charlie cut, right? This thing became this thing, right? That's such a huge departure from that. Like, that's a completely different mechanic. So don't be afraid to tinker around with things, to take them in a completely different direction, because this is such a the fact that you went from a one-handed cut to actually an overhand shuffle is very, very interesting, right? So again, right, don't be afraid to tinker with things, to try different things. And yeah, because honestly, if things look exactly the same as they do from when you started working on it and then versus like the end result, did you really put some work into it? So honestly, the fact that it ended up completely different, I think is very, very interesting. And that's how move development should go. It should go in a completely different direction. And, you know, as far as it goes, like, obviously sometimes there can be minor changes, but I think like whenever like a move has like massive development, like I think that's where the true like tinkering, and that's where the true thinking actually starts. So again, don't be afraid to mess around with moves. Don't be afraid to completely change moves depending on how you want a particular move to really feel and look. And so yeah, I think this move is generally not the best, but it does show, I think, a lot of things that I love about just the development of sleights and all that stuff. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this, and yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, and see you guys next time.